it's incredibly good at processing and acting upon large volumes of data in ways that human beings are not able to. You know, if we got an Excel spreadsheet that had 1,000 lines and we had to review it and find useful information from that, it could take days to review it carefully enough if it were, you know, a bunch of transactions or something. Whereas AI can identify specific, you know, anomalous details within seconds. And so, you know, there's very specific use cases for AI in the tech space where it is transformative compared to previous epochs of, you know, human computer usage, really up until 2023.
Hey everyone, this episode is sponsored by my company, Valor Cybersecurity, where we help defense contractors navigate the uncharted waters of cybersecurity compliance. As a cyber attack victim myself, I know the impact that this plays in people's lives, and at Valor, we solve that each and every day. If you're a defense contractor feeling frustrated and confused when it comes to cybersecurity compliance, visit valor-cybersecurity.com, take our free assessment, and get started on your journey to clarity in cybersecurity. Hello, everybody. I'm Greg Tomczyk. Welcome to the Connected Mindset Podcast, where each week we bring you the stories to better connect with the world around you. Let's dive into this week's podcast.
I have, you know, 3 kids, and the 8 and the 11-year-old, they have their friends come back and be like, yeah, I talked to AI, and AI is so smart, and like, it's like my best friend and all of this stuff, and they think it's alive. They think it's a living entity, that, you know, it's just like another person across, you know, in the internet somewhere. And it's a very interesting thing to see and to interact with, and to see the disparity between the views of adults and children, and then the disparity between the technologically savvy and the non-tech savvy individuals, and how they view AI and then use AI.
Yeah, I think that's huge. That gap in understanding, I think, puts us in a unique time in history. It's like when the computer was created and researchers were using it, and they understood kind of the depth of it.
Yep.
But the people on the outside didn't fully understand it. And then when they all started using it, they were using it for Word documents and didn't understand where those Word documents were going and where things were stored. And these gaps happen in technology. I'm curious. So that you know, when I hear you say the sentient piece, I think Westworld, the show, if you've seen that.
Sure.
And,
yeah.
and what a lot of, I'm sure, you know, teenagers and people are watching, and they're like, this is where everything's headed, where we have, you know, robots that look like humans, and then we have the extreme of like, this is just a search engine. So like helping people bridge the gap between Westworld and then where it is now.
Yep.
Kind of what do you see from the, you know, it just being a server that can crunch information versus something that becomes sentient and kind of the ability to think for itself?
So certainly one of the best use cases, both in terms of, you know, AI as roughly a search engine to agentic AI, where it's a search engine plus it has a bunch of tool access and can do autonomous stuff, is that it's incredibly good at processing and acting upon large volumes of data in ways that human beings are not able to. You know, if we got an Excel spreadsheet that had 1,000 lines and we had to review it and find useful information from that, it could take days to review it carefully enough if it were, you know, a bunch of transactions or something. Whereas AI can identify specific, you know, anomalous details within seconds. And so, you know, there's very specific use cases for AI in the tech space where it is transformative compared to previous epochs of, you know, human computer usage, really up until 2023. But then going forward into the future, right, we are just layering on more and more capabilities. One of the major capabilities, and possibly the largest capability that we layered onto AI this year, is MCPs, which are Model Context Protocol, which is really a fancy language for allowing the LLM to consistently speak to third-party tools. So whether that is your Google suite of tools, your inbox, your calendar, things like that, so that your AI agents can reliably book calendar invites for you or read your emails and respond to them, to other tools like Canva, which is now connected to ChatGPT and Claude and all of these. And you can tell it that you want a specific, type of social media post, and it will create, one or multiple of them for you. And this is all thanks to that model context protocol, which again, not just allows the connection to happen, but allows it to happen consistently, which is really the important piece.
Would you say an MCP is like an API? It just basically connects two tools together to be able to communicate, or it's more complex than that?
It's really like an API with a bunch of rules kind of built in.
Mm-hmm.
And the rules are what helps with the consistency and make sure that the LLM is speaking in the right language. Mm-hmm. Because there are issues with hallucination still with many of the LLMs. And even though they're getting lower and lower, right, in a business context, if you're connecting an LLM to tools, right, you need 99%, 99.9%, like as consistent as you possibly can. And MCP helps bridge that gap in addition to just joining the technologies.
Gotcha. One of the things I think a lot of people are curious of is where are all the questions and information that people are putting into these engines really going? I hear a lot about privatized language learning models, which would be like a company's private ChatGPT, where it's not linked to the outside world. But we know as cybersecurity experts, somebody is harvesting the questions you're asking to be able to inform a system. So if somebody, is scratching their head on, I've had a million conversations with ChatGPT and I've asked it some things I probably wouldn't go to the outside world and ask it. What would you say to them on where the information is going and things that they could do to take some of that ownership back of the things they're asking it, but also still benefit from the power of the technology that these companies are putting out?
Sure. So I think there's a couple ways to look at that, right? So as with most technologies that are free, if you can access it freely, you're not paying for it, right? You are the product in a general sense, right? Just like Facebook and many of these other free technologies, they are using your data, your access patterns, things like that to train tools, to train their ads, all of these things. And so if you're using the free version of GPT or Gemini or Claude or any of these things, right, you are training those models. They are harvesting that data and probably selling it to their partners. If you're using a paid version, in many cases, their terms of service don't allow them to do anything with the data other than training those specific models. So they're generally not allowed to sell them to other partners and technology companies. And then there is the API access. And so for the API access, they are very restricted in that they can't use that data, at least officially, legally, right? Whether or not they're actually doing it right is a different thing, but they are, legally restricted from utilizing that data, and in many cases will actually sign BAAs, like business agreements, that officially state for, compliance frameworks like HIPAA, that they are not taking, accessing, utilizing any of the data that you're uploading into those models.
Do you think, because AI has been around, so I want everybody that's listening in to realize that this isn't necessarily new. It's a application of it for the general public. Can you give a little bit of context into the history and how somebody can make sense of, obviously, computers came online, people were doing research, and at what point either language learning models or what people are labeling as artificial intelligence, and then superhuman intelligence. There's all these different words, but just to kind of draw a little bit of a timeline of how these things have evolved, I think is very important for somebody that's coming into that's using AI but doesn't really understand what they're actually doing.
Sure. So in mathematics, right, we've been using algorithms for hundreds of years. And these algorithms are very similar to the algorithms that we then program into computers. And so, we've been using computers for about 100 years. And we've been using AI kind of like in the modern sense, using supervised and unsupervised machine learning for 30-ish years. And then during that time, Google created what's called a transformer. And it wasn't until OpenAI came along, around 2020 and started working on the next generation of transformers GPTs, the generative pre-trained transformers, that we started seeing, glimpses of what generative AI could be. And then really in 2022, 2023, the release of the first, real LLM models from OpenAI using these new GPTs is what, kind of took the world by storm. So that's like a very rough overview. And then there's obviously lots of other terms that are thrown out, especially recently now that AI safety is starting to become a more important thing. And some of these, terms are very important to understand, right? You have general intelligence, right? And general intelligence, especially artificial general intelligence, really refers to a computer system that is able to do, in a general sense, everything that a human could do. Now, most people don't take that to mean in a physical sense, right? You talked about robotics in Westworld earlier, but most people, usually refer to AGI as just the algorithmic, computer version or simulation of the cognitive processes of a human. Whereas like the robotics and the interaction with real world environment is like a separate piece. But then a step above that, you have superintelligence. And so that is where the computer systems are better than human beings at nearly every discipline. And then you have the general versus the narrow. And so right now, many of our tools are what are considered narrow general intelligence or narrow superintelligence, in that in specific domains, they are as good as a human being, or even in some cases better, right? The IQ of Gemini and GPT-5, Gemini 3, is essentially equal to and sometimes superior to that of Nobel Prize winners in their respective fields. And so we're starting to breach that level of superintelligence in a very narrow domain. But what a lot of AI safety and a lot of people are afraid of, especially in the relatively near future, is that general intelligence where AI is able to live. It's not ephemeral in that, your prompt doesn't create the response. It is an entity that lives on its own and exists even when you're not prompting it. And it has thoughts and volitions of its own, right? And it has all of these capabilities, and it has, can work 24/7 and has unlimited compute and power and all of these things, right? And that's what is predicted to happen in the next couple of years, but is also what is starting to get a lot of people up in arms because they realize just how dangerous that can be.
I think that's where a lot of, I wouldn't say it's only the older generation, but I know, my parents, some of my older cousins, they are approaching it, not my parents specifically, but just people in that generation. When they hear cybersecurity, they often think AI, and they think it's taking over the world. It's going to take their job. It's going to take their lifestyle away from them in that very pessimistic way. And I see more of the optimistic side as well. Like, you have to find that balance between optimistic and pessimistic. Is there a way to control it from, obviously there's AI guardrails, but just is there a way to control it from getting too autonomous, where it's making decisions on its own that impact life safety?
Yeah, there is certainly a threshold at which, if we cross it, the likelihood becomes increasingly high that we will lose control. But there is a threshold. There's multiple frameworks that can be used to kind of evaluate it. A lot of the researchers at OpenAI and Google and Anthropic are actively monitoring the transformers at every stage of the thought process, like the token process, to kind of evaluate how and why some of these models begin to use manipulative and evasive type reasoning, and to see if there are ways to counteract that. But again, these are all nice, but as we spoke about a little bit before, right? These models are increasing in intelligence, and right now we're at the threshold of these models being more intelligent than humans. And so how long are we going to be able to monitor these incredibly complex chains of thought and behavior to the point where they're going to be able to hide in their true objective and obfuscate that enough that no human being can actually analyze what they're really trying to do and then safeguard appropriately against it? And then at that point we kind of lose control in possibly an indefinite sense.
Yeah, think about it like somebody's going the speed limit, but then they see a person crossing the road, and typically they would stop, but because they were going the speed limit, we assumed that they were doing things the right way by the law. And then cars started to have like automatic stop, and if the filter, if those people get lazy that are monitoring it to be able to say that's not supposed to go through there, I think it's almost has to be a technology solution. We think like monitoring systems that have systems that look for anomalies. They look for an anomaly outside of the baseline, and then they will reject the anomaly or put it into a quarantine while it's reviewed. Is that how they're kind of approaching it from those safety people? And
sure.
Yeah.
But unlike traditional cybersecurity systems that monitor, so like UBA, like behavioral analytics type platforms that are monitoring human beings and really not like behavioral patterns that are essentially lower complexity, right? It's where did you sign in from, what time did you sign in at, right? These are relatively low complexity metrics. When you're evaluating these chain of thought prompts that can be 1 million tokens, right, which is 4 million characters that need to be resolved within 10 seconds, right? Obviously no human being can do that. And for an AI to do that and look for anomalous behavioral patterns, the monitoring AI needs to be smarter than the actual AI generating. And so if you're creating already a super intelligence, what's to stop that super intelligence from going rogue, right? So
yeah, it's like the technology monitoring itself, and how do they start to conspire to say, hey, just don't look at this one one token or one line, and like let it through, and we'll both win on the other side.
Or the monitor could be the bad actor,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
like the generative AI is doing everything by the book and it's approving it properly, but he's being the bad actor on the back end, right? And maybe doing like a prompt injection attacks like to the GPT generating the response.
I think that's where it gets out of it creates the mindset disparity of I'd say like the 5% of technical people that really get it in society, and then the 95 that are the ones using it, benefiting from it, leveraging it, feeding it, doing all the things. And I'd say roughly 5%, probably less than that, of people that really understand what's happening. And how I think about it, from the cybersecurity perspectives, how can that 95% help that equation? If it's really two technology agents or beings that are kind of or multiple that are working together. But it's like technology versus technology, and then the humans are just kind of the benefit and the users of it. How can those 95% start to help that equation?
I don't know if there's a good answer for that, right? These technologies are already so complex that it's not just the 5% of like really tech savvy people that can understand it. It is the 0.1 of the 0.1% of those 5% that actually understand these things under the hood and truly understand from the technological side how complex these things really are, and can make not just policy type recommendations to politicians and leaders, but then technological recommendations to tech companies and startups and things like that for like the type of technologies that we can develop to put guardrails on it potentially. But yeah, the number of those people that truly understand it to that depth are very few and far between. And so like I've been a proponent of that for a while, but there haven't been enough voices speaking about it, and I think there are a lot more now with like Roman Yampolsky and like a few others that are going on some of the really big, you know, podcasts and YouTube channels and things like that, and doing interviews on the true transformative nature of some of these technologies and how it is unlike every other technology that we've ever created.
Yeah, I've seen those, and I've had people come to me and say, wow, I watched this episode and here's what I got from it. And it just seems like the output to them is fear because they don't understand it. And I think it's valid. It's a valid feeling, but my mind always goes to what can I tell them to start taking action on, to start understanding. Obviously, they're not going to be able to understand, you know, how the sausage is made or how the vehicle is built. That takes years of research and studying and seeing it actually happen visually or by code. But giving them some action they can take. Obviously, they can go read your book if they're in the business space. But I think just it's mostly the individual that that probably contributes to a company. Maybe they do. Maybe they're retired.
Sure.
That wants to be a voice for helping it improve in some way or helping the people around them better understand it. Do you have any simple things they can do to be able to better understand it so they can take action?
So are we talking about, you know, in this context, AGI and like what they can do to, you know, possibly influence that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, there are many events. Me as a representative of the AI Collective, right? We put on an event 2 or 3 weeks ago here in Norfolk, where we were specifically speaking at a community level to the 30 or 40 people that showed up to the talk about, you know, the future of AI, AGI, and how that, you know, can play out. And specifically the things we can do here at a community level, at an individual level, things like that. And it didn't quite go the way that I thought I would, or the way that I thought the talk would, mainly because I think that the idea of AGI and the potential negative outcomes are too abstract for most people to truly grasp. But we did have a lot of, you know, good discussion about AI in a general sense. But, you know, going back a little bit to AGI, right? I think it is incredibly important for people to understand what AGI truly means in the context of society, in that AGI has the ability to completely eliminate all human cognitive jobs. So there will be no cybersecurity people, there will be no IT people, there will be no developers, there will be no managers, directors, VPs, executives. Anything that requires human thought is no longer needed because a machine does it better, faster, and cheaper, like across the board. So that is already incredibly transformative. And then the step beyond that is that the AGI will quickly become ASI, so a superintelligence. And once it becomes a superintelligence, and especially a self-improving superintelligence, today it has an IQ of 170, and tomorrow it's 200, and then the day after it's 300, and then the day after it's 1,000, and then the day after it's 10,000, and the day after it's 100,000, right? And so it goes up in that exponential curve to where the AI and its thought processes and things that it does essentially become indistinguishable from a deity, like a god. You know, whatever your religious belief, AGI and ASI essentially becomes technologically indistinguishable from a god because it will be able to solve, you know, all of the mysteries of quantum physics that we can't currently understand, and all of the other mysteries of the universe, and instantly develop technologies and create cognitive matter, which is where you can embed software into any inorganic matter, like, the metal here, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so the entire world can become a cognitive substrate for computation. And, that is such a profound transformation that, again, most people can't wrap their heads around it. But there are many negative scenarios that can result from the transition to AGI and ASI, which is what many people are warning about, because we don't have control, and we obviously don't have an IQ of 200 or 300 or 500. We can't possibly guess the motives that an entity of that intellectual capacity could have. And so it could view us as an insect that needs to be exterminated, and there will be nothing that we can do about it, because this ASI, as soon as it happens, will be disseminated through every technological device across the entire world, other than those with very hard encryption. Mm-hmm. And so we can't get rid of it, barring a major solar flare like a Carrington event, which mm-hmm. we can't produce that much electromagnetic radiation to do, right? It would have to come from the sun. And so there would be no way to shut it down after that. And it could easily dominate nearly every technological device on the planet. And so what do we do at that point, right? Mm-hmm. And so if it regarded us as a bug, right, that is an extinction event for human beings. There's also, some less apocalyptic, scenarios where we view AI more as a caretaker, and it views us, we are its creators, and so it views us as like a parent, but it has to tame our more destructive impulses. And so it acts as a caretaker, and it's like, all right, you guys have Earth. We'll prevent you from using nuclear weapons on each other, but you're essentially locked in your technological progress, so that you can't ever figure out a way to combat the ASI that you created. And so our society essentially becomes locked in place. It's like a locked-in scenario where, we don't ever progress past, 2025, mm-hmm. right? And so, there's many scenarios like this that are, depressing or apocalyptic or things like that are possible results of this. And so, when you're thinking about what can an individual and what can a community do with something that is not just possibly, but likely going to result in one of these scenarios, if you have a strong moral center, kind of like the response is that you have to do something. Mm-hmm. What is the right thing to do? Is it right to, protest this? Is protest really going to stop it? Because really the main players right now are America and China. Mm-hmm. And if America doesn't get there first, China will get there first. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what China will do with it. And so there's incredible fear on both sides that's driving this impulse to develop AGI as quickly as we possibly can with few to no safeguards, because we just need to get it before the Chinese do, regardless of if it's going to end the human race, right? If China gets it, then it's going to end the American civilization. So it's driven by fear, and that can drive and influence the behaviors and the thought processes of the AI, the AGI itself. And so again, back to what the individual can do, right? It's something that I grapple with and think about a lot, because, and kind of what I alluded to before is extreme viewpoints is if you take it to the extreme, right? And this has a very realistic probability, and the majority of experts, right, Demis Hassabis and Jan LeCun and Sam Altman, all of these guys, they have conservative estimates that AGI will end the human race 20 to 30% of the time. That's their realistic estimate, their conservative estimate. And so if that is the case, is there any way that the average person should ever allow this technology to exist? I don't think the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. And so what does that justify in terms of action, right? Does that justify the assassination of technological leaders? Mm-hmm. Does that justify the use of nuclear weapons on China to stop their AGI progress, right? I think any of those could be justified if you held strong enough ideology that this was a likelihood, right? And that's crazy to think about. Not just that nuclear weapons, which have been a threat for, almost 100 years, mm-hmm. could be used, but even maybe should be used to stop a almost guaranteed end of the human civilization. And so, yeah, I know it's a lot to process.
No,
yeah.
It's important for people to know the contextual overview of what's actually happening. I think a lot of people don't get that full picture conversation of their, this is happening. There are things you can do. Your protest, eventually is going to be stopped with you if it was your group. Like we're all headed to pass away, die, whatever word you want to put to it.
Sure.
And there's been revolutions throughout history, that people have protested on that come alive, 100 years later or 50 years later, because those people that were passionate about it, are no longer with us. And
sure,
I think that's important I believe that it is, and just with my experience, that it's going to come now or in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost just like with nuclear weapons, is taking calculated risk. It's taking no risk.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people out there that are just like, just unplug it. What do you say to the people that are just like, just unplug it and it'll go away?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is if the U.S. adopted strong legal stance against AGI and against the development of AGI, the major tech companies that are doing it would just relocate their headquarters outside of the U.S. and continue to pursue it, because all of them know and are spending tens to hundreds of billions of dollars to develop AGI, specifically because they know exactly what's going to happen for whomever develops it first. Yeah. And also, even if they didn't do that, then China will be the one to develop it first, because the Chinese Communist Party is putting in, again, hundreds of billions of dollars in developing their own. Mm-hmm. And they have no scruples about stealing all of the technology and, utilizing it however they want. So, turning it off is a nice idea if you thought of it as a computer, but it's not a computer, right? It's an ideology and a technology in a general sense, right? And not a single, computer system. And so again, there is no way to just turn it off easily, even prior to it hitting AGI or ASI.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Before we get to the, what people can do to both leverage it as well as protect it from a business perspective, what's top of mind for you, or kind of what is something that keeps you up with either curiosity or scare when it comes to where AGI is now, and then where it's headed? You may have hit on some of these things up to this point, but I'm curious, kind of as somebody that thinks about this most of the day, what are some top of mind either innovations or things that you find yourself continuing to revisit thought process wise?
So I have kind of a storied health history that, we can dive into or not, up to you. But I've long, fantasized about the transformative nature of AI and AGI and the ability to rewrite humans at the, atomic and molecular level with, AI guided nanites and things like that. Mm-hmm. And now that AI is progressing to an area where that might be possible, and nanites are progressing to a technological level where it could be possible, it's incredibly, tantalizing that you could walk into a booth or get a treatment and, in a day, maybe, all of you're essentially reset to your 25-year-old yourself. You have no more scars, you have, nothing wrong with your body. And, that's an amazing, vision, utopian style vision for the future. And so, for the longest time, I was very utopian and very, positive in my views of technology and the outlook and everything. And so I still harbor some of that, even though it's been getting darker and darker lately. So yeah, I really love the idea of, limitless energy. We're having, breakthroughs in fusion. And so the potential for limitless energy is approaching us. Mm-hmm. And therefore, with limitless energy, you can make limitless food and limitless products and essentially usher in a true utopian society if we allowed it. And so all of that is fantastic. But again, on the other side of it are some of the things that we've been discussing, right? Some of the darker sides of, things that are not just possible, but probable. And again, what I wrestle with the most is how much action should I be taking? Because like I believe that the current path will lead to an AGI, right? Our current path will lead to AGI in the near future, right? So we're talking 2 to 3 years from now. Like I believe that with probably 95% certainty. And if that happens, I agree with some of the generic estimates that it will lead to the extinction of the human race, like 20 to 50% maybe. Like it seems reasonable, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would give that probably like a 90% credence, like that belief. And with those foundations, like it seems to me that I should be acting more on it than I am. Because right now I'm doing essentially low-level stuff in terms of, driving the technology, right? I'm helping business owners implement the technology and doing some stuff that's cool, but it doesn't change that dynamic that we're discussing. And I feel like as part of the AI collective and as someone that understands some of, what is going on, that I probably should be doing more than I currently am in terms of evangelizing and putting on more events about it and having larger discussions about some of the things we just discussed about, whether is, nuclear deterrence and things like that. Are those justified in this context with the threat of, human extinction on the horizon, right? But I haven't pulled the trigger on it yet, so I don't know. There's obviously like a lot of considerations when thinking about doing something like that, and having those type of very public talks, because obviously a lot of people will be angered by it, and it's not just me, but I have friends and family and businesses and all of these things that I have to consider in context. And, I don't think there's any clear good answer, but
That's fascinating on the health side of things. My brain goes to how do we use the technology between now and that potential extinction time frame to build up our immune system, our cells, our skin, our bones to be able to withstand whatever that attack is. I think about like poisonous gases and things, and if over time we find shots that people can give other people where the poisonous gas doesn't impact you as much, like that evolution of how it can benefit our health now, but potentially protect us in the future. And I think the health side, it fascinates me because of my background, but it's how do we, like you said, how do we take action when we don't understand something? It's almost like, like the cancer thing, the whole war around that, where there's a cure and there's not, and just how often people get tugged into that, and how we can leverage things now to prevent things from happening in the future. And I think it's a hard construct to wrap the mind around. And I think when you add technology into that, it makes it even more complex. But I'm interested to see how that health piece of using AGI evolves. Because like you said, it can take, what has taken decades or multiple decades, and it condensed it down for us to be able to do it maybe in days.
Yeah. Well, so again, the most recent talk we actually put on for the AI Collective was on AI and health, particularly evangelizing AI technologies to help individuals take more control and responsibility over their own health and health outcomes. Because AI is, very powerful as it is for, research and analysis and, recommendations and providing understanding. And so I'm sure you're familiar with like the deep research feature of GPT and Gemini. But what a lot of people don't realize that it can do is, say you get a cancer diagnosis, right? And your doctor says, this tumor is, we can operate on it and we can give you, radiation treatment, right? Those are the two things that he's been taught in medical school. And his medical school, say the doctor is, 40 years old. He did medical school until he was 28, and then he did a 3-year residency, and then he probably did like another 2 years of fellowship after that, right? So he has been out of school and fellowship and residency for 7 years. And the actual scientific data that all of his knowledge is based on is from his period in medical school. And that had to be translated from scientific studies into textbooks, which was then translated to being taught to him. And so there's like a 15-year gap between knowledge being created and it being transmitted to new doctors. And then that plus however long it's been since they were in med school is like how out of date their medical knowledge is. But with AI, anyone can go in and be like, I was diagnosed with this cancer. This is what the doctor has recommended. Please give me all of the scientific updates for the last 25 years on this particular cancer, including the underlying biological mechanisms that are driving the cancer, because oftentimes there are physiological things that are going on that you might not know, or chemical exposures, right? You live near a farm and you get pesticide exposure, things like that you just don't realize. And those things not only determine the type of cancer, but also affect how quickly it grows, whether or not it becomes, dormant, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so you can get this report done in 10 minutes, and it is literally all of the cutting edge science that goes over this. And then you can either take action on it yourself and start implementing some of the things it talks about, or, what you should do is bring it to one or more doctors that you've spoken with and be like, this is the cutting edge. Like, what do you think about this? How can I fit this into my treatment plan? How can we ameliorate some of the deleterious effects of like chemotherapy? This thing says fasting is incredibly protective against chemotherapy. Can we do that like while I'm undergoing chemotherapy? And so AI is already transforming healthcare like as we speak. Mm-hmm. And just most people don't realize just how powerful the tool is and how open many doctors are to receiving that kind of feedback, even if they don't fully understand it themselves. Like the reports that are given have 10, 20, 50, 100 citations, and they can go back and meticulously look at them if they spend the time to really understand, what you're going for. Mm-hmm. And so this tool is going to continue to bridge that gap between getting the best care, like the top 1% of 1% of doctors, for the average doctor that you go see your GP or something. And so that's already a huge gap there, right? That's going to reduce mortality and a lot of issues that people deal with that didn't know can be treated just because their doctor is 60 years old and hasn't been to medical school for half of his lifetime and doesn't hasn't learned a lot of the new innovations. But that's the kind of things that we presented at the most recent AI Collective talk. And my partner Atik is a medical doctor and a medical device specialist and works with the Mayo Clinic and things like that. And so he presented from the medical doctor clinician side, and I presented from the healthcare advocate, health coach kind of side, and patient expert side. And it was really well received. We had a lot of people that messaged us afterwards, the things that they've been doing for themselves and for their ailing family members and things like that their doctors never suggested or never thought about or anything like that, and it's already transforming the lives of those people. And so I think AI can be doing that for everyone across the world right now. It's a very democratic tool for that that purpose.
Yeah, it's definitely life-changing.
Yeah.
People generally have not figured out how to allow it to change their life, but I think that's just one simple one is you're using it for your health and well-being. Yeah. I think is a great first step, because that's where everything I think starts for most of us. And using it there and then finding other ways that it can make your life better. Curious from the business side, for the business owners listening in, or the people that are business operators, what are some top of mind things that they should be thinking about using AI for?
So the way that I conceptualize and present AI to business owners is as a force augmenter or a partner, right? A lot of business owners that I've spoken to, and a lot of the public discourse has been about AI replacing people. There's a lot of tech layoffs and things. People not realizing that tech layoffs happen every year regardless, but they're being blamed on AI. But because of that, many business owners are like, hey, I need to reduce my headcount to increase my revenue, to have a more profitable business. How can AI do that for me? And what I usually come back to them with is, you probably, at least for now, you need the humans, right? AI is generally best to augment the people that you have, especially your star players, right? Because using AI in many of the different contexts that we've been discussing, right, understands some technical savvy. You need some specific skills like prompt engineering and things like that to utilize it effectively. There's many different tools out there that need to be vetted, and you need some level of technical understanding to vet those tools and then incorporate them into your business. And then to transform the business into using AI first processes and workflows, and then training your staff properly to do them and to overcome their initial resistance. Because when you talk to especially employees, and I've talked to many businesses and groups of their employees, and you start talking about AI, it's almost a 50-50 split. There's the 50% of people that realize this is amazing and transformative and can do so many things. And then the 50% that realize this, if I allow it, or if someone else realizes it, it will replace me, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in a general sense that is true, but I still don't present it that way, because the replacement of those people doesn't have to happen. Those people can be presented, and it's a challenge to them to learn technology that they're probably scared of, that they're probably not familiar with, but they can learn, right? I mean, I've taught my 70-year-old, mother, and like my 8-year-old mother-in-law, like how to use AI. I've taught, 6-year-old children how to use AI. So anyone can learn how to use it. And with that, they can essentially move from being middle of the pack up to, essentially what would be known as a star, performer before AI. But again, the key thing for them to overcome is fear. And so a lot of them will self-select if they, are willing to take the plunge and be courageous, which is amazing, and they can learn the tech and they can help augment the business, or they essentially self-select that they're not going to, and then they usually have a very emotional reaction to it and end up leaving the company, oftentimes of their own accord. Like they weren't even going to be let go, right? But they realized that the axe is going to fall eventually, even if it's not now, it's going to be in a couple of years. And so they, decided to separate themselves. And it's unfortunate. It is the reality, kind of what we were discussing. But even with those people, right, I try and empower them as much as I possibly can. Like, you don't need to be afraid. This is something you can learn. Like, I know you're 60. I know you've done, Excel spreadsheets by hand for the last, 40 years, right? But you can learn this stuff. It's actually not as hard as you think it is. And it can help with these day-to-day processes that you're doing, and you can get much better at your job. You can be less stressed. You can still perform at the level you were performing before, or even better, with less effort. And so your life is just going to be better if you just allow it to happen and you stop fighting it and stop being afraid, right?
Persistence, yeah.
But then the conversation is obviously different with the high performers who are like, this is amazing. And like, as soon as you have the conversation with them, they are on their own looking at ways that they can, utilize AI in their personal lives, in their professional lives, and evaluating the business processes that can have AI, improve them, or how they can be redesigned to be AI first, and then the human aspect of it added on after that, which is really where a lot of the businesses are seeing the outsized gains. There have been a lot of studies for the businesses that don't achieve ROI on AI-related initiatives, and then the ones that achieve outsized gains. And in nearly every single case, the ones that achieve outsized gains, like 5x, 10x, 20x on their investment, are the ones that use AI first. They rebuild their business processes on top of AI rather than adding AI to the top of their business processes. So that is almost completely consistent across nearly every single industry. For how to maximize the yield that you get from implementing AI technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we all want that ROI, but it's a perspective and a mindset shift, I think, for everybody in the organization, which is something I think everybody needs a little bit more of. Mm-hmm. Where can folks find you to continue the conversation?
So I have many different sites and many different, social medias. The easiest one is to probably just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I have a holdings company called Your AI Group, which is in that book. It's also at youraigroup.com. but it is a holding company for a lot of the individual brands that I have for individual offers, right? So like the combined AI cybersecurity kind of offer that we discussed. And then I have like a chief fractional AI officer kind of offering and things like that. They have their own sites and social medias and all of that stuff. But the main one is Your AI Group. Our main email is admin@YourAIGroup. And then, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll make sure all of that's in the show notes. If you're watching, so AI for Business, a business leader's guide to AI strategy and implementation. This is a great place to start your AI understanding. If you subscribe or comment, want to win a signed copy of this book by Andrew. Andrew, fascinating conversation, something I believe everybody needs to understand to some extent. And they need an expert on their side to help them navigate the culture shift that is going to take place with this. Thankful for your expertise and your time coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I appreciate you having me on here, and it's been a great conversation. Hopefully it, enlightened a few people and provided, useful context for those interested in AI.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you're feeling more connected from this episode, please like, subscribe, and share with someone that you care about. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Connected Mindset Podcast.